I'm here with Anne Earle. Anne, thank you so much for doing the podcast.
So nice to see you, Zach.
This has been I think with like 2-3 years, we've been trying to plan face-to-face. Not that we don't talk face-to-face, but actually having the time to record a long-form conversation that's not immediately work, we haven't been able to do. So it's really nice to be with you.
Yes. Thanks for nudging me along.
Oh, gosh. I need nudging too. So, Anne, you are an LPP coach, and we're all really grateful to have you on the team. And you also are you do clinical work in your own right. You have a private practice. Will you tell people a little bit about you, your work, and what keeps you busy?
Well, so I've been very busy since the pandemic. I was busy before it, but obviously since the pandemic, first of all, Life Process got super busy for a while. I think people were home and they had the opportunity to embrace an online program, maybe address their substance or their behavioral problem. So that was just super, super busy. And it kind of stayed that way. Life Process ebbs and flows, and we've made some changes in terms of the independent program that people can do now. But I always have, a decent chunk of active clients from Life Process program, which is just fantastic. And I have, a full private practice at this point. So frankly, lately, I'm glad you were nudging me, because it's been hard to find a little extra time to do something that's important, but, doesn't feel as urgent.
How did you come to find clinical work as, I don't know if it's a passion, maybe I'm projecting it onto you, but as, a career choice?
Yeah, well, it definitely is a passion, and it became a passion. I originally went to social work school and did not think I would go into clinical work way back, because I thought I wanted to be more on the policy end of things. And I also think I thought that clinical work would be a little too presumptuous. I'd been in psychoanalysis myself. I was during social work school, and I remember thinking, even though they didn't say much back in those days, I remember thinking that it would just be too, how could I possibly say something about somebody else's life? I'm not living their life. I'm not in their shoes. It just seemed like you're making too many assumptions. So I honestly just didn't pursue that. I ended up in clinical jobs. I worked in Mount Sinai inpatient psychiatry because sort of by default. But honestly, back in that time, I didn't feel as proactive about my career. I don't feel like I got that much guidance. Thankfully, today, I think people tend to think long term and think ahead. So I kind of wound my way to it. And I've always been involved in it a little bit, but the substance and addiction work has just really been fantastic. I mean, I feel like I'm well suited to it. And at this stage in my life, I feel like, and the approach that we use, I think that's helped a lot, which is, not making assumptions about anybody else's life, trying to help them.
When did you become interested in the addiction side of things?
Well, I was literally trying to figure out, should I do, what do I have any lived experience around? And I had to sort of recreate my career after having been mostly a full-time stay-at-home parent. So I figured, okay, I have some lived experience around addiction. How about that? And then I met Stanton. I did some more work researching it, and it just became a really perfect fit. So in harm reduction, I always felt like I must have been a harm reductionist all along. But I didn't, it just was great how it really, really unfolded as time went on.
Everyone I've asked this so far has always started with, it's a funny story. How did you meet Stanton?
I actually met Stanton on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's not that funny.
Yeah, I mean, and LinkedIn is a good way to meet people, I think, sometimes. I don't use that much social media. As you know, I'm still a holdout on Facebook, but yeah, he literally said, "Are you a recovery coach?" And I had just completed my certified recovery coach training. And I said, yes. And so we started to exchange some ideas, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Really been a blessing to know Stanton Peele, one of the more brilliant people I know.
So he reached out to you.
Yeah, I think I sent him the request first. Actually, speaking of, we were talking earlier about being brave. That felt like a brave step. This is a well-known person. I'm interested in this field. Why not? And, he responded. So,
And it started a collaboration. That's so cool.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so when you started making contact and you were exchanging ideas, have you always had the kind of mindset that you do now? And I won't say it for you, but a lot of the work we do in LPP, if you buy into it at all, it does buck against a dominant system of care in the country. And you seem like a very agreeable person in some ways, and then in other ways you're a very independent thinker, at least what I know of you. So I could see that you'd be well suited to, thinking in first principles kind of way about what addiction is. But has this always been your bent, or did you change your mind at all since working with Stanton, or maybe vice versa?
Well, Stanton, working with Stanton has just been a huge privilege, because you just get that wealth of knowledge and experience that goes back so far.
Yeah.
But I do feel, so I first decided I needed to adjust my drinking right during my divorce, very stressful time, wanted to get a handle on my temper. So I did what I thought people do. My grandfather did it. He was a great guy. I went to 12 steps, and I don't mind groups, and that was there. And I didn't have that much support at the time. I don't have family in the area, so it really worked fine for me. I was very good at sort of taking what I thought was applicable and leaving the rest. And I know that's not everyone's experience, but for all the work I'd done in my life, throughout my life, that wasn't hard for me to do. And so I remember thinking, well, okay, I've had like a year of this experience. I guess I could go into this field, but I wonder, I don't really want to do this only. So I started to look into other approaches. It obviously made sense to me that there were. Honestly, I didn't even know how many other things there were out there. And that all started to make sense with my own experience with it along the way. And I also had to keep taking courses for my credentialing and things like that. So it gave me a great opportunity to study with, motivational interviewing and Dr. Tatarsky at the Center for Optimal Living, and, places like that where you could just really deepen my understanding. And then, of course, as Stanton once said, we aren't paid a lot. Most of us are here on Life Process to contribute and have this amazing experience of working with people all over the world. So I think that was a huge, huge learning experience. So that helped too. I don't know if that answered your question about how I got here now with harm reduction.
Yeah,
my nephew died of an accidental overdose a little over 3.5 years ago now. And, we hear this often, I'm sure you do too, that if my family had been familiar with harm reduction, maybe that wouldn't have happened. So, there was tragedy in the midst of that. And obviously I've worked with, unfortunately, a lot more of that tragedy over the years. I think many people feel that if they knew what they knew now, then they could have responded differently. Well, you wrote your book.
You're a very warm, supportive person. It seems like that's your nature, but I can imagine that you're even more, because of the salience of your own situation, that could help in your work with other people who are experiencing, having young people or family members going through systems of care and not knowing how to navigate them.
Yeah. Well, it definitely helped to have, not helped, but it gave me a very close relationship to the struggle. And I do work with parents who have a child or a loved one or a partner, who is struggling with a substance use problem. And I think it definitely gave me a lot more humility and compassion for their situation. There are no easy answers, there's no one size fits all, all that kind of stuff. I think that's, but there are ways that you can improve. And that's really, we worked a little bit about that when we were collaborating around some Life's Process work. There's definitely always ways to improve and stay hopeful.
I know that it's a sensitive topic, and we could even just cut this out if you wanted to, but is there any bit of your nephews and then your experience with that you'd be willing to share that would help people understand how you realize that if there were harm reduction involved, then that could have helped them rather than been tragic?
Yeah, thanks for asking a question, Zach. I don't mind talking about that. Of course, hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah,
I remember distinctly feeling at one point, gee, the last time I saw him when we had a chance to spend more time together. We used to take a yearly family kind of reunion vacation. I really didn't have enough information that was alternative to 12 steps. I know he had done 12 step, he had done, some rehab type stuff. And so I didn't, and I knew it wasn't really fitting. So I didn't really have the resources that I wish I had to have a different conversation. It would have been a very different conversation. I don't know if that answered your question. I kind of forgot what the question was.
No, it did. You had mentioned that because of after your nephew's death, you recognized that if there were harm reduction, principles followed along the trajectory of helping him, then that could have saved him.
Well, I think, we never know. So that's the first thing. But I think that, and parents do everything they can. My sister and her wife did everything they could. From their perspective. I think that had they had a different attitude around drug use, I think they would not have felt that, God forbid he's using heroin.
Right.
So maybe that could have been part of the conversation. They could have been more open. They were, they weren't giving him a hard time if they saw him having a drink or two. They would have preferred that he didn't, but that I think and I don't want to speak for them, but from what I know, I think they would have freaked out if they thought he was using heroin. And I think that therefore he, was secretive about it, and it was hidden and no one knew what was happening. So then there's no one talking about it. There's no safety discussions. There's no support around it. And in that sense, of course, fentanyl I don't think he was actively seeking fentanyl. I think it was just a mix of stuff. He lived in Milwaukee. And so it was absolutely, shouldn't have happened.
Yeah. It sounds like, I've heard this a million times, but it's always good to have a fresh perspective on it. I mean, alcohol, okay, you can have the sensibility that, geez, I wish you wouldn't drink, but look, we know people do. If you're going to have a couple drinks, we'll put that on the back burner. There are bigger fish to fry. And it's something Carl Hart has called recently, and I think he'll write about it in his new book, drug exceptionalism, where you have one drug that's okay, my drug is better than your drug kind of a thing. And I think a lot of times I used to have this, and I know family members have had this when thinking about me and my problems in the past. I know a lot of family members who have it now. They think one drug's okay, one drug is, oh no, this can't be happening. And even though if they really were taken to task about their thought process, they might say, yeah, I know that no matter what I do right now, he probably is going to use again. People want to say, oh no, not heroin, please don't. And then just forget about it, or hope that they could do something to make it not, the loved one not to use again in the future, when a more honest approach is what you're talking about, harm reduction, which would say, one way or another, whether I like it or don't like it, this person is using this drug, and I better think about what it is that I don't like about it, so that I can meet this person where they are and have the conversation with them, but doing it in an inviting way.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I mean, I'm trying to think about, do you work with people now, or have you worked with people since then whose kids, whether they're kids or adults, are using drugs that they're horrified to learn that they're using? And have you worked with them to take a harm reduction approach?
Yeah, I have. And I think that, of course, with the, however we want to describe it, overdose death epidemic, it's been in the news more and more. Not that it's never been a problem, and, but it got into the news as things have changed. I think that that's something that, people are scared, understandably. They hear about the risk, and it's always scary if you're dealing with any risky behavior with someone you love. And it is risky, there's risk for sure. And I think that, so coupled with that, that's added to the fear, understandably.
How is this sort of attitude played a role in your own parenting, if you don't mind me asking? I had a nice conversation with your now adult daughter recently, and so impressed, because I knew about her through the context of you talking about her here and there. hearing her talk so intelligently about about everything, about pedagogy, about her thoughts about addiction and what it meant to be able to for people her age to be able to partake in things without feeling like they need to be isolated. It was so adult, honest, smart. So that's why I know that you have something to offer in this conversation regarding your attitudes about your own kids and drug use or whatever it is, any behavior that has always the potential of going awry if it gets too carried away, and how you handle that, how you take a harm reduction approach.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Stanton's tried to get me to answer this before. I don't know if I've done so well, so thanks, Zach. It does help that she is technically an adult, has graduated from college and has moved, she lives on with roommates in Florida, which was sad because I was hoping, listen, I live in New York. Can't you stay in the New York area? But she likes warm weather. She's got a nice group of friends. She's got a great job. She moved down there after the whole pandemic thing, initial lockdown. And it helps. My son's in college. So, you never want to disclose too much that isn't appropriate for age, for their age, their privacy, all that kind of stuff. So that I've been mindful of, and also just my family's privacy regarding Lucas, my nephew. But I think that I feel more comfortable with it now. And honestly, I've grown more confident in it as time's gone on as well. And again, I always want to say, the jury's still out. No one knows. Bad things happen. Mistakes happen. I don't feel like there's any way that you can prevent everything. We believe in prevention and education, and it all helps. But I still know that, there's always risk involved. I think that it's helped me sort of back to this idea that it just always made sense to me. If I can keep open dialogue in a non-judgmental way, that should be ideally safer, because at least I know what they're doing as much as I've had people tell me, no kid tells their mother what they're doing when it comes to drugs. That could be true, but I feel that we're pretty open about it. So that feels better in many ways, not just the safety component, other ways too.
So I know, let's see, I can do this delicately, I think. I know from talking to your daughter that there are experiences that she's had and decisions that she has been about to make or has made that she knows her cohort would feel uncomfortable talking to their parents about. And so they make this decision with no advisory except their peers who are also engaged in the same behavior. And she knows that she can always call you, and she doesn't feel worried to do it. She like when she calls you to ask about something like should I do this, should I not? She knows that she's going to, or that I have done this, what do you think, or something, whatever. It's always just going to be a dialogue, and it's going to be interesting. So she doesn't get nerves about it. She said, I can call my mother and it'll just be like I'll be able to get an onlooker who's not, in my own body and who can actually see beyond what I can see. And she helps me out. And it's nice to be able to know that I've got someone to call so that I don't have to do things in isolation. So you're a person in her life that she feels like she can call on no matter what, even if she has nobody else. And I find that, I feel like I'm a new parent now, and I feel like there's no better thing my kid could say about me if I were getting older than something like that. So I imagine you must have at least had, we don't have to be specific about anything, but that you had the attitude that you need to stay open no matter what's going on.
Yeah. And I think I come by that honestly on some level. My parents actually had an open marriage, and there was which was, I guess, better than affairs in a closed marriage. I didn't love any of it, but it's how I grew up.
Interesting.
And there was a big emphasis on honesty and openness in my family. We all did this thing called the S training when we were young. I started doing it when I was 12, later turned into landmark education. There was a big emphasis on communication. So obviously that's been sort of in the background and forefront of my life throughout my life. So that was one piece. The fact is, my parents weren't secretive about, I mean, there was enough openness around that.
Yeah.
So I was raised with it also.
So
And
open
then,
dialogue was just modeled for you growing up.
I mean, I would
The way of
say
life.
yes and no, but I think that then I'm not someone who's great at I'm not going to share anything from my past, or I'm just too open with them. I mean, obviously age appropriate and all the rest, but it's just not, I knew I was never going to be one of those people who would pretend that I never used drugs. I think that was around for a while, and then that wasn't even considered a good idea as a parent. But you were never supposed to glorify it or say, oh, this was so much fun, or tell drunk stories or do anything like that.
Right.
And I know obviously we're all sensitive to that. I don't think anyone wants their kid doing something that's particularly risky. So I don't want to make it sound like this has been easy, because it hasn't been easy. It seems to get easier. And that's the nice thing about kids getting older. If you do have that groundwork of communication, you don't feel like you might, hopefully you won't lose it. I mean, I could always mess up, but I feel like it would be me messing up to some extent.
So this makes total sense to me. And I can see, I think people will be able to see why that transfers well to your clinical work.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've described so far. Oh,
well, I was going to say, I think the fact that I was in this field and ended up in this field was a huge blessing. I mean, obviously, I'm more knowledgeable. The conversation is in our house all the time. So it's not that, meaning, my kids hear about not individual names, but just individual struggles. And so they've learned a lot themselves. Emily helped my daughter with life process one summer, not doing direct work, but just helping with different support things. She learned a lot. My son here. So it's really very active. So that is a benefit in that sense, and a comfort level that I wouldn't necessarily have. I mean, everyone can get more comfortable because so much is available online. We can educate ourselves, but it's a scary area. But I gotta say, I mean, when my son first walked out the door for the first time to drive by himself, and he was gunning to get that license as soon as possible, I was like really nervous. It, that stuff is scary sometimes. Less nervous now. Took me about a month.
But that's a kind of a cool way into this, because there are those just normal milestones that parents and their kids are going to have, like driving, that don't feel really nice. I mean, you want to be that a good parent wants their kids to just be happy and free and independent, and at the same time it's like, no, please, you don't, you're gonna make mistakes, and you have to learn, and that's such a big mistake to make. So
and also if you're doing the drivers, if you're teaching them to drive, my son started pretending he was teaching me to drive at about 13.
There's so much.
And back to substance use. I mean, obviously, I learn a lot from them too. From their cultural experience. They've been through their teen years. My son's entering college. My daughter's going through college. It's in their culture. So I mean, it is in their lives. Now, some kids it may not be. I think in my case it was. So I'm very happy that it doesn't feel out of hand, or doesn't feel like something that's too terribly scary at this point.
Yeah. Do you feel like you and your clients have that kind of rapport as well?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think obviously, non-judgment is, that's also been a value of mine, for as long as I can remember. And I won't go into some of the ways I kind of picked it up, but I think that creating that sort of safety sense and really non-judgmental space, and really caring, I think that really helps to create a pretty close bond. And it's an amazing thing. And as I said, it never gets old or tiring, or, people are like, oh, wow, you really listen to people's problems. It doesn't feel like that at all. It feels very helpful. Sometimes it feels scary and risky too. That's something we always have to monitor and take care of. And I have other resources and other support in life process. We try to connect people to local resources if they need more. So we're not trying to step outside of our, what we can provide.
Right.
But I think that it's definitely not it's not a without a sense of risk. If I didn't have a certain capacity to handle that, I probably couldn't do this. And
How
during the pandemic, in the last couple of weeks, it's felt like, whoa, a lot of people are really having a hard time, and that
yeah.
gets hard. You know, I'm sure you experience this all the time too.
Yeah. In clinical work, and then also in schools, just people in general are having a hard time. Some people are more stoic about it than others, but I think even
Yeah.
people who seem like they have it together sometimes are, you know, it's more evident than they think that they're having a hard time. So of course, people seeking our help are going to be having a difficulty. So when you heard my conversation with Dee, and one of the things that she and I were talking about and have talked about before is the balancing act between being completely non-judgmental and doing a motivational interviewing kind of technique. And so really you don't have to do you don't have to put a judgment out there one way or the other, or your own thoughts about it. You really are trying to hold a mirror the best you can to this person's experience and trying to extract what it is that they want, and then seeing if there's a way that you can reflect those things in a way that they can build themselves up. But when it comes to you being nervous about the way somebody's headed, or feeling like you have a strong opinion one way or the other, how do you balance that? How do you balance trying to be just a listener and a reflector versus needing sometimes to be the kind of person who will offer advice when asked?
I think we all probably try not to offer advice, but I think so. Even if we're directing anything, we're trying to do it in a transparent, non-advising way.
Right.
People often ask for advice, and they can get frustrated when you aren't willing to give it. But what we're trying to do is help them unpack what feels right to them, because they're the ones who have to go do it, first of all.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But the risk piece is really, an ongoing trying to pay attention to my own instincts and what's being said and what's going on, and being willing to bring something up if it does feel. So obviously I'm first judging if there's harm. As a trained social worker, you have to assess for harm and risk, especially to others. So drinking and driving, or any kind of violent behavior, these are all things we're trained to assess for, and meaning that's something we are obligated to be aware of. And so if that kind of thing comes up, or suicidal thinking, to not shy away from it. And I'm not afraid of it, but if it's keeping me up at night, which it doesn't do that often, but that's something I want to pay attention to myself. I think I didn't start out by saying one of the biggest groundworks for clinical work in general, and for substance and addiction work specifically, is our own self-examination, and I think that's what makes it challenging, and that's what makes it interesting at the same time. So that's important too. And I'm not sure I made that direct connection that Dee was saying, but I don't feel like I had to unlearn attitudes about drugs and substances, because I really never really, in other words, I didn't have to unlearn a lot around that. So the judgment part really doesn't feel strong. We work with people with behaviors that they're so ashamed of.
Yes.
That it's, you certainly, first of all, don't want to lump on any more of that. It just intuitively, you don't want to add to that. The biggest problem, and part of the cycle of it, is oftentimes just helping them look at it with less shame and less, self-loathing. So that comes naturally, because in a way, just because of the nature of it. So it's hard for me to ever imagine having a full agenda and doing work that way. It would be very hard for me, which is partly why I was so happy to be able to work for Life Process, because I was like, okay, that's not going to be the case, because that's not the principle of the program.
Yeah.
And B, I couldn't even think of where I would be able to have this approach of really self-efficacy and really helping support them on their path. Obviously mitigating for any kind of harm they might be causing to someone else. That's a different story. That was really a wonderful thing that, just sort of continued to make make me feel even more confident and strong about that this approach is helpful to people. It really does work.
Made a couple really great points there. One, that people are just ashamed. People seek help, tend to be ashamed of something that they're doing, or doing something in isolation to the extent that they're not able to talk to anybody about it. Like, just beginning the conversation would be such a landmine to have to for somebody else in their life to have to step into, or it would take so much explanation, or maybe it would require them to articulate themselves in ways that they have never even tried before. And so the other point that you made was, imagine how exhausting it would be if you had to have an opinion about every single, professional opinion about what someone should do in their lives every single time. You would, first of all, never know enough about their lives to actually make a coherent opinion. And second of all, if you were the kind of person who needs to have an opinion, that really would take a lot of energy, more so than, well, maybe depending on who you are, but it seems more so than actually letting the person talk things out and helping them frame it.
Yeah, well, that's a good way of putting it. And I think that people obviously feel a lot of relief when they can finally talk to someone as openly as they can even handle talking about it themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we can tell them, I'm not judging, but, that inner judgment is, you can't just push back at that. You have to be kind of gentle with that whole thing.
I remember my wife, she started working as an addiction therapist, and she had never really used drugs in a destructive way. And I remember her thinking, she had this like imposter syndrome kind of a thing, even though she's the opposite. She reminds me of you in a lot of ways, and that she didn't have to unlearn anything to be non-judgmental about things, because she just isn't. She thinks people are interesting, and she sees that were she in similar circumstances and had the similar antecedent events in her life as some of these people she talks to, then she could see herself making the same decisions. And that's what I have kept reminding her since she started her job, is that, isn't that enough? If you could say, I could put myself in your shoes, and if the circumstances were the same, then I could see myself making the same decisions. I feel like that's plenty in order to do a job helping people. What do you think about that? And have you ever had to help people in your own practice or an LPP who have had experiences or done things like, we offer drug addiction coaching, but also sex addiction, porn addiction, food addictions, probably a range long enough that you haven't experienced all those addictions. There's no way we have lived
experience with everything.
Right. Yeah. Right. So what's your take on that?
Well, I do. First of all, we know that lived experience can't be all, or you could never be, a 25-year-old therapist talking to someone without children that are adults, because, you haven't had adult children yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Or you're there, you never had. So there's no way we can cover the gamut of human behavior and experience. I do feel, and sometimes lived experience can kind of get in our way. You don't want to over-identify, or so it's a little bit of both. I feel grateful that, and there's the thread though. I mean, I think at some point, are we going to get to a point where we don't even necessarily distinguish, this drug, because there is a thread of the way Stanton so well describes addiction. And that I also think that sidetracking your wife for a second, but it is a human experience on a spectrum to some extent. We all have things we wish we didn't do, but don't seem to stop. Wish we, did more of, but don't do, but can't seem to get it together to do it. So that we can all relate to, so where is the human experience in this? And I think, I'm sure your wife, as you said, sort of coming at it in the way she doesn't need that specific experience to be able to do what she does for all of those reasons. And so, but I feel like it's helpful to me in some ways, for sure. I mean, I think for sure with, the loss of my nephew, although I am the first to say that was not the loss of my son. I help run a group for people who have lost someone to addiction. And I don't feel I have that at all, the child loss experience.
Right.
And sometimes I feel a little like, do people think that that's the category? Because I'll have to kind of explain that.
Oh, like you need to be totally forthright and saying, I didn't lose a child.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
I'm in a different way of being in that group.
yeah.
So there's always the nuance of our lived experience, but I think that you know, I forgot what our initial question was. I think you were talking about your wife and non-judgment. Oh, and I don't want to sound like I'm always non-judgmental. I'm extremely non-judgmental with my clients. I literally like ask for help on a daily basis to be as non-judgmental with my own children.
No one is a pure, judgment-free human being, of course.
Not really.
Of course.
But it does come very naturally. And it's easier, as I said, in a way when people are hard on themselves. Certainly don't want to pile on anything.
Yeah. So yeah, my wife is probably fine if we do sidetrack that conversation. Just she doesn't probably want to be talked about, but she's a good example of somebody who's so competent at what she does and takes a common sense approach and still feels as though she might be doing something wrong. And that's something I want to get into. You made the point that, all right, so there's no possible way we can experience everything. If you're going to be a helping person, you can't have experienced all of the things that all of the people that you help need help with. It's just not possible. But we can say something like addiction. We can say it's just within a range. The fundamental principles of what makes an addiction are things that we've all experienced in our lives to some extent with some sort of relationship or involvement. So that's we can all kind of tap into that. And then if we're professional enough and thoughtful enough and non-judgmental enough, we can really be helpful. And then you kind of mentioned that it's not, but it doesn't mean that lived experience is a bad thing or doesn't help. Like I know some people, and I think I have myself lived through some sort of a traumatic kind of experience that helps me both serve my own needs. So I say, how can I prevent some of the things that I hated from happening again in the future? And also, how can my experience help other people think through what kind of decisions they might make? So it's like nobody wants a shitty experience, but if you're going to have one, may as well map it on to what you do in the rest of your life. The last thing I'll say on that is that people can get bogged down with personal experience too. So like I work with people who are like this. I've experienced people who are therapists of mine when I was younger who are like this. They've done a drug, so they know what it means to do drugs, or they know what it means to be addicted to that drug. And they can over-explain something based on a small sliver of their life that they've experienced and think they can extrapolate that onto everybody else's. So do you think there's anything?
By the way, I think it's quite tempting to do that with substances and drugs.
It's very tempting. Yeah.
I don't know why, but because they can be kind of intense experiences. So there's that, oh, I did that one once, you know what I mean? And I think that because I don't know, it's like if you've never tried, a certain type of food, there's that desire to connect around an experience, which and identify with it. So there's over identifying, and we're just always trying to walk that line where it's helpful, and we can, always say, listen, I mean, I think through all my training, you don't normally share that much of your own experience unless it feels like this is helpful or relevant.
Yeah.
But it's a good point to always check that, I'm not trying to be the neutral psychoanalyst that I could never be and turn me off to being a clinician in the first place. No offense to psychoanalysts, but my psychoanalyst never said a word. I think she said like something 3 times. I'm like, that would never work for me. Yeah. I also let people know up front. I mean, I also am trained as a coach, and there is a coaching component, and I've been engaged with coaching either for me or, back in my landmark days and some training. So it is a little more, and in life process, we are helping them, but there is more of a kind of, can we be upfront about this? You ask permission. Is it okay if we talk about this? Those are ways that can help any conversation. I mean, including if I'm like, asking my son, can we talk about your cell phone, and because it's bugging me when, I come in and you're still going like this, 3 sentences in. So it's always good to see if we can ask permission. So that's just what we do, I think as best as we can. Obviously in a therapeutic setting or a clinical session or a coaching session, you're very tuned into doing that. That's why I said I'm often like, gee, if I could just be this way around my kids 24/7, I'd be an even better parent.
Yeah. There's something to be said. That says something, that you can be in that zone and be incredibly helpful, but not necessarily apply it all of the time in all of your life, because we only have so much bandwidth. And that means something about like the way that those people that we're giving any kind of knowledge base or our attention to, can they extrapolate it in their own lives? And like the expectations that someone going to like a therapy or having coaching or something could just take that away and just immediately right out of the gate start living the life they want to live. I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Like if I were the way that I operate when I'm one-on-one with a client, a student, then I would be perfect. But it's not a chance. And if I actually believed, if it were actually true that everything that I said to a student or a client is something they would take and just run with immediately, then they would be perfect too. So it is a tug and it is a give and take, and there's no perfect way to mold a human being, nor would you want to. And there's no perfect way to be a totally non-judgmental human being.
Yeah. I think we really are trusting the process that people, I like the fact that it's called Life Process Program, back to Life Process Program, because it really, life is a process, life is unfolding. Who are we to say what someone else's process is? And I wouldn't even want to do that. It's harder when it's like people closer to you or your own. And, but it's actually really interesting. I honestly would love to be, and I strive to be really more neutral when I'm listening to my kids, whether it's about a mate or someone else. I really am trying to avoid my opinion, but it's not always easy. It's not always easy.
To step out of your role is
much easier to do in a clinical setting. And it's not because we don't care. It's just because there's something about the nature of the relationship. You're really on you're on your best behavior. You're really paying attention in a certain way.
That's so interesting. Do you have personal experience with addiction in your life, or at least do you have a personal experience with addiction that you'd be willing to share that helps guide your perspective in the work that you do?
Yes, I do. And I do feel that it's been helpful at times. I think, first of all, when I was younger, tween years, whatever, I definitely got into a phase of pretty binge eating. And I won't go into the long story how I sort of overcame that, but it was that perspective, how I overcame it does kind of inform my work today. I'm really everyone individual pathway, even within the life process. People have their own pathway. Some people might still be doing their 12-step type of approach. Some people might, within this approach, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of time spent in, OA meetings or things like that, SA meetings.
What are OA and SA?
Overeaters Anonymous or Sex Addiction Anonymous. So you're also dealing with that other kind of piece along the way. But my own experience with the binge eating, which I was able to overcome with about a year of my own self-work based on a book that I came across that I honestly don't even think still exists. The nice thing was I was in it for the long run. I knew that I wanted to have a different relationship with food. I didn't want to just have it be weight focused, because the gained weight was, I didn't love it, but it wasn't even that significant. It was more knowing that dieting probably got me there in the first place. So I really wanted to shift my relationship to food. So it was kind of a multi-stepped approach of how to shift your relationship with food, which to me is not that different than some of the work that we do with our clients. And thankfully it worked. And, it then made room for me, for example, when I became an ethical vegetarian and eventually vegan, I was able to do that. If I had not overcome my restrictive binge approach to food, I wouldn't have been able to take on those restrictions without causing trouble. So, and it wasn't a problem at all by then, but I was, fully recovered from that. So I don't know if that explains it, but so that, and then with my alcohol use, I mean, there have been times throughout, if I quit drinking, maybe we would argue less, with my former spouse or, whatever else. It was always kind of tied into not so much a physical thing or feeling, but just like how it would affect my temper. I mean, flat out honest, that's my negative consequences, my temper. So I have to either manage my alcohol or manage my temper. So most of my work is really around, because I like to be able to drink alcohol, is really around whatever it takes to keep tabs on myself so that things aren't building up, so that, I mean, I could lose it without any alcohol, but that might tip it to a point where I'm going to say things I regret or be more mean-spirited or, lose control. I don't mind losing control vis-a-vis alcohol if I intended to and I'm enjoying it and it's safe. I don't want to do it in that direction. And so that's really a core part of my work and my practice, is managing the things that I think might lead to resentments or temper, things like that.
So that is a lived experience that seems like it really helps. Like we're talking about, we're not giving any advice really, but we in a tacit way are, because we are buying into an overall process that we're working through with our clients. That's called the Life Process Program. And, a question on someone's mind might be, well, how would you know that this kind of a thing would work? And you have lived experience with actually having to incorporate into your lifestyle a new way of thinking about your relationship with both eating and with alcohol, and not just kicking. I mean, you can't stop eating and you haven't just stopped drinking, but so you just had to reorient.
I mean, I did for a period of time. Long period of time, but a solid year. I mean, that's what they said in the DSM-5. It worked for me. And you want to know that you can do it if that's one of your goals, which for most people, I think it is. I certainly get the struggle. It was definitely not easy for me to stop drinking for those first, month. It felt a little white knuckly and all that. I mean, again, I had a lot of stress in my life at the time. And so I think that, you do have some compassion for how hard it can be.
Yeah.
I do think that, I don't know if this even fits in right now, but I got to say, I think people are always really inspired by the issue around values. And it really helps for so many things, I think. But it's interesting to me when people haven't necessarily examined that.
Yeah.
And I think it's always it's one of the parts of the work that I really, really enjoy. And just get so much inspiration from, when people can start to see, is this not aligned with my value? I mean, I don't think, I mean, we can all say, I mean, probably most people my age would never say, oh, gee, it would be bad if I never, if I didn't quit drinking. I mean, no one regrets that usually. But we get something out of it. So the enjoyment versus the harm is what we're partly trying to weigh, the cost benefits, which is, partly what we're dealing with the pandemic too.
Right.
I think that my compassion value certainly doesn't go along with a person who can say mean stuff if they've had 2 or 3 drinks. I had to really look at that. And if it's not working for me, I have to be open to tweaking it, if that makes any sense. And that's being pretty honest. I'm not gonna lie. But I was willing to share that.
The one that you talked about, you couldn't possibly have worked out a track for yourself where you were eating in an ethical way until you worked out your eating disorders. Did you call it that?
Well, I mean, aligned with my value of when I decided I really did not want to continue eating animals because it didn't align with my value.
Right. You
or
couldn't have
like
done that.
compassion for all beings, then, but that would have not, I feel like if I hadn't handled the first thing, it wouldn't have allowed me to be able to take that on.
And when you were trying to handle the first thing, was not eating animals something you were even thinking about, or that's just something that naturally occurred?
No, not even thinking about. I mean, I became a vegetarian when I was in 4th grade. I didn't last. I fell off the wagon. I was interested in animal protection as a little kid. I did some stuff as a pretty young kid, but I didn't stick with it. And I think it was probably always bubbling around in there. I mean, you know, raised with animals and that kind of stuff. Rescued a squirrel from a cat when I was 12. I mean, there were some formative experiences, but it was very clear because it's a very restrictive diet, you know,
Yes.
and restriction was not working for me. And that's what I had to work on overcoming.
Very
So
interesting.
that's, you know, this whole question of restriction is obviously huge when it comes to addiction. And we could probably, you know, full circle back to why I also feel that with kids, and again, we're not talking little kids, we're talking like age appropriate. You work with kids that when they're starting to explore and experiment with substances or any other thing that could become potentially problematic, you know, restriction tends to get pushback, whether it's sneaking or it's over glorified. I mean, I know Stanton's written on this, as opposed to it being more normalized. And that's again back to sort of, you know, with the 12-step work of all or nothing, you know, sober or off the rails.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of harm reduction. I mean, there's so many beautiful things about it, but as just a life philosophy, it's not black and white thinking. Maybe that's why it takes us so long to say everything's that, because
it's not black and white.
Nothing's black and white.
It's funny. It's everything we do is everything we've said so far, I think, is pretty common sense, but it can take a long time because. Well,
that's a good point. That would shorten things up a bit.
but there are assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
There are assumptions. That's true. Thank you. There are assumptions that people have about what it means to do one thing or another that are usually people aren't parsimonious about it. They believe a story that they've heard, or maybe they haven't done a lot of thinking about it. And addiction's no different. And so if people have heard the story that if you're an alcoholic, then you have to stop drinking forever, they maybe haven't thought about what that really means. A forever restriction actually doesn't usually make sense in the larger thinking about the larger picture of life. You know, there are going to be times where,
especially if you're, you know, 19 or 18 or 20, it's hard to picture the rest of your life without any mind-altering substance for the rest of your life.
For sure.
Which I think is part of why it's very hard for people to find that path of recovery and maintain it. Which
even
we know we could go on for a long time about the dangers of that potential setup for failure. Yes. You know, which I think both of us probably believe is circles around the whole overdose death crisis.
Sure. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Even you said you stopped drinking for a year.
Mm-hmm.
If that were a requirement for you forever, I can imagine, you can tell me if I'm wrong, then maybe it wouldn't have been as easy for you to stop for a year, or as easy for you to say, all right, maybe I do want to start drinking again. Mm-hmm. I mean, if the only thing that you knew was that either you're bad because you're drinking, or you are good because you've stopped forever, that doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for you to be doing any of your best thinking.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just want to throw in there that I never thought I was bad because I was drinking, just to clarify.
But you also never thought that you absolutely had to stop drinking forever, right?
Yes, but I didn't. I mean, I was doing all the, you know, literally we're talking about like occasions when I would lose my temper, and that just wasn't acceptable to me.
Yeah.
But I think so. It was never anyone else said you've got to do this or you've got to do that, or, you know, it was never that kind of thing. But that's, you know, that doesn't even matter. That's when somebody else is seriously complaining about it.
Right.
I think. But the what were we just talking about? We were talking about the all or nothing. I mean, the way 12-step work gets around that is one day at a time. So if someone puts down the drink, and I have to say, I felt that was helpful, but I knew it was like a little mind game trick, because if you go in there and you're planning to quit, you're not thinking I'm going to just quit for today. But the because I hadn't figured out, and a lot of people in life process or people who I work with in my practice, they haven't figured out what they want to do yet.
Yes.
I mean, I think statistics show a majority of people do not want to quit permanently. What is it, about 80% of people, even if they seek help or want some help, are not necessarily ready, willing, interested in full-blown quitting. So like we're working with that space. And I think that's why, that's why harm reduction is helpful. That's why motivational interviewing is helpful. As you know, I always forget I'm talking to you, Zach, so you understand.
No, that's okay. Don't assume I know anything, really.
Yeah. But but I think, had I thought about the forever piece, I think that trips everybody up. And I think the way people get around it is with sort of, okay, let's just worry about today.
Yes.
Definitely would have, I don't know what I would have thought. I knew I wanted to feel like I was back. I had the reins of the buggy again, even though not a big fan of horse-drawn carriages.
I've been interviewing people who are professors and authors, and they read about Stoicism. I've been really interested in Stoicism lately because I, by default, accidentally had been practicing Stoicism throughout this whole pandemic. And so once someone told me that that's what it was, they would say, just read the Stoics. You should see that that's, those are things that they talk about. So I thought that was interesting. So I've been talking to people on my other podcast, The Social Exchange, about what it means to be a Stoic and about these. And I've learned that AA really does borrow a lot from the Stoics. So when you're talking about things like one day at a time or the Serenity Prayer.
I find that extremely helpful. You don't have to use those words. You can do it, but it's a concept is, and I don't think they came up with it. It's an awesome
no
for me.
Yeah. I mean, that really is thousands of years old, that concept. So there are things about AA, when people ask me this a lot, that makes people even say, well, the life process program just sounds a lot like the 12-step programs. And what they're saying, I think, is there are little bits of wisdom packed in the things that you guys are saying at LPP that I've heard said in meetings. And so the difference is just one is a lifestyle that leaves your mind open for addressing each issue that you might face or element that you might face, open-minded way. And one is kind of says those tropes and then doesn't actually allow you to behave that way. There's rules to it, and if you don't follow the rules, and you're doing it wrong.
Which of course is so silly if that's what we're supposed to be helping people with. But that's of course there are amazing things like that, and I think that that's where it can be helpful when people have had the work to sort of figure out what do they want to sift out and take the good and leave the bad, and what do they want to add. And I think and there are definitely major differences, but it's interesting when some people sort of, even coming through life process, completely not from anti any kind of spiritual approach, can somehow still feel like they're at this level of awareness for themselves that starts to almost have that sort of notion of that gets way too complicated to explain right now. But
you touched on, I don't think that's what you were trying to say, but you touched on something that I have wanted to ask you, and there are just a couple things that now I'm remembering that were important for me to ask. One is, do you deal with a lot of clients at LPP who are either in or have been in or still buy into 12-step principles?
I mean, I'm bad at percentages, Zach, and it's been several years now, but I think many have been in and out of some kind. Many have had nothing at all. It's certainly in our culture, and in the media and in every movie, so it's so broad that it's hard for people to even think outside of it, I think, even if they haven't had direct experience with it. But I think that, I'd say a fair amount have had some, not all at all. Many have specifically chosen life process because they didn't get success with their 12-step work. And they're looking for success, understandably, and however they define that. And then, they really get this thing of powerlessness. So that one I knew, not going with that one from the day I walked in, and God bless my grandpa and all that stuff. And, it was nice to be able to do something he had done. I mean, that was partly why I really wanted, was kind of channeling grandpa. I loved my grandpa, and felt I needed support in my life at that time. It was a very rough patch. he was always a very optimistic guy. But what I was going to say about the powerlessness thing, I get it. But obviously I was never going to encourage that belief. I mean, that was just no way, not nurturing that one. I'm also a theology student. I'm on a spiritual path. I'm not going to identify with I'm powerless over a substance. That seems in contradiction to my, however, spiritual, theological views, beliefs that I've tried to examine. That one doesn't. But I also kind of get it. I mean, there are times when people can feel pretty powerless, you know what I mean? From, in the grips of that feeling. But that doesn't mean that they are actually powerless, over the substance. And I get why it's there too. I mean, I feel like I'm familiar enough with 12 steps. I'm time in it enough to feel like I kind of get why a lot of it's in there. And as you said, it goes back, a lot of it goes back a long way. And I also see the downsides, major downsides. I don't know if we're getting too black and white.
No. There's such a difference for me between discouragement and like acknowledging that that's an okay thing to feel, or feeling powerless and acknowledging that that's okay to feel. And then kind of like, what do you think you'll do about that? And having to admit like it's an anti for being in some sort of, a program, is that, okay, admit before you come in the door, check your coat and admit your powers, and then we can start. So,
no, I forgot what step that was. Well, I knew I was just going to kind of BS my way through that one, but that's okay. You have to kind of play the game when you're in there to get what you want to get.
I'm laughing because that's so. It's true. People take out what they can actually identify with or actually seems valuable, but some people are not. Some people think if there's a regimented program, they need to follow it to the T, and they're trying to learn how to do it. So
some people really don't necessarily have the ability or the strength or whatever it is for the life experience to not internalize that, and especially when people are younger. I don't think they, I know the one that always got me was my life had become unmanageable. Maybe it was because I either had too big of an ego or that just did not seem like the case. But that's like one of the, admit you're powerless and your life has become unmanageable. I was like, ugh. And I can't deal with that one. But I'm gonna play the game, and okay, well, it's unmanageable if you call like screaming occasionally unmanageable. But I was also dealing with like betrayal and all sorts of not so great stuff. But yes, I mean, when you have a kind of high functioning, I hate that term, so forget it. But what I'm saying, life where you're contributing and you're doing good things. To declare your life is unmanageable. Now, unmanageability could be like all over the map. What's unmanageable to me may be different than what's unmanageable to someone else. But those little declarations, if you're not, some people really internalize those. I mean, I work with a guy who's, has not touched drug or alcohol in over 30 years, has a different behavioral addiction now. And he is just, I mean, people walk around with like terror of the thing still.
Why do you think it is that people are able somehow to square 12-step ideology with LPP? Because I work with a lot of people who are in 12-step programs now, and they enjoy their time there.
Yep.
And they like what they're getting out of it. And they also say, I love this program. Why do you think, how do you think people can, even though we don't see ourselves compatible with 12 steps, but we do invite anyone who wants to be in our program to be in it. So it's like, if you are in 12 steps, please still, that's not feel discouraged with joining our program. I'm trying to put myself in someone's shoes who's in a 12-step program and then comes to something like the Life Process program who's, I don't know, I guess our precepts or whatever you'd say, or the way that we talk about addiction really opposes 12-step ideas. Anyway, I should stop talking.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I think I said that this would be a much bigger discussion, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, more from sort of a toolbox approach, and you kind of cherry pick. Also, what people are getting from that might be more the community. But I mean, if they're going full blown sponsorship and all, I mean, I have clients I'm working with right now, and it's a little bit of a thing because, you know, they're identifying as an addict and all that. And depending on how, if I feel like that's kind of getting in their way, I mean, I can kind of bring it up, but it's also just, you're not always clear. I don't want to mess with something that's working for them either.
Right.
You don't want to mess with something that's working for them. So you just try to help people with what their goals actually are.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I mean, it'd be fun to talk about this sometime.
Yeah.
Off camera.
We could. Yeah. Okay. Let's do it off camera.
Well, it's worth doing on camera too, but I have to think about it a little more. It's definitely like up in my life in terms of this, but it feels okay. You know, like it's working okay.
Yeah. I don't have a reasonable. I don't think. I probably haven't thought about it enough to give a good answer, especially on camera or something I'm publishing or saying I'm proud of. So I'm good with giving it some thought before, but maybe we should talk about it again sometime.
Well, I wanted to say, I mean, it's not, I mean, for example, I mean, I might be working with someone who has a struggle with eating, disordered eating, and they might be working with a nutritionist too, or they're, or someone, so it could, there's always, I wouldn't want to detract from something they've got value from elsewhere. So they,
right.
I don't want to be in competition, but it's not even a competition, but just counter doing. But that gets hard if, I think what happens with life process is people start to notice along the way with themselves that, okay, this part's not working for me. This part is.
Right. That's what, of course, it should work from our perspective that someone who is in a 12-step program is asking questions or filling out questions about themselves, because it's not really our job to have a judgment about what else they do.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a judgment about whether they're doing drugs or not, whether they're, doing anything or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not up to us to make a judgment about what kind of program they're in or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that part makes sense to me. So maybe there's something about just the fact that we are the kind of people who do that allows our program to be accessible if they want to borrow some of the strategies or questions or thoughts that makes sense. What do you, what's something that since you've worked in the life process program, you've learned? What is something that the life process program has taught you, like through your experience working there, that you never expected to learn or never expected to think, or something that's changed your mind or opened your eyes to something?
That pops right out of my head. I never would have dreamed that I would be working with people who struggle with pornography. And I mean, I had a fleeting moment about 10 years ago, which was like, maybe I should work with people who have a problem with pornography. But I would have never thought that. And I don't know that I would have ever thought that I had this much compassion for people who struggle with pornography. Again, big topic, in the sense that, but the people, a big chunk of the people I work with over the years do. And, they really, their struggle is bad. Okay, I know what I'm trying to say. I think sometimes people think, oh, pornography addiction, that's kind of funny, isn't everybody, there's a minimizing and kind of a giggliness to the whole thing, which is insulting in a certain way to any, major severe addiction that people are really struggling with. But that said, you can understand how that happens. I think that it's nice. I would have never had that attitude, I don't think anyway, but it's just been really amazing to see how much, people really want to make a big change, and how much real struggle and pain and suffering and shame there is in there. And how much people that I've worked with, they really do respond so well to non-judgment and just a lot of relief to be able to talk about this thing that they've kind of been trying to juggle and keep secret, and just dealing with their own, their own sexuality and kind of the driver of the whole thing and people's life stories. I mean, I have had people with some significant, assault in their background too, when you're talking about a pretty severe addiction. So I guess it's just, I mean, I think we all know that there's usually something that went wrong. It's something really takes over someone's life in a very destructive way. And the consequences have been, very, very destructive for people. So it's not just like, oh, okay, they're wasting their time using porn. I mean, that's not what we're talking about.
So it's a topic that if you don't really give it much inspection, if you think about it or just hear it passing, it sounds like it should be trivial, but you've recognized the depth that any addiction, including porn addiction, can have in a person's life.
Well, I think that, I mean, if I wasn't in this field, so I didn't really give it that much thought, except for my fleeting moments, because I've known people personally who've had porn struggles. But I think I just wouldn't have guessed it would be this helpful and broad of a experience, and work with so many people. And at this point, I feel pretty confident about being able to help people with that. So I guess just off the top of my head, and it's not something I've had personal struggles with. And I also have strong opinions about the porn industry. I mean, pretty strong opinions about the porn industry. So maybe that was the part that was missing. And exploitation of women, and and child trafficking and all that stuff that can get segued into all this. So as an industry or an unregulated industry and all these other things, there's a lot that I'm not too happy about. But I'm amazed that it doesn't seem to cloud my.
I see.
That's maybe what I was.
Very interesting. Yeah. All right. What is you don't have to say biggest. Those are too large words. But what is what is a significant mistake that you've made since beginning clinical work that you wish didn't happen, but also what you've been able to learn from along the way?
My son would say that I do too much, or let the time go on longer than it should, or don't charge, like things like that. This is with life process. So, spend longer responding to someone than I should, that kind of thing. So a little more on the self-protection side, I guess, not protection, but just like managing how much I give back with what seems appropriate. And one could say that that's not necessarily even good, because you don't want to create any kind of dependency. It's not that easy to get one from Life Process Program, but I mean, I have had some situations where you feel like there's too much, you need the boundaries, and there needs to be, and it's nice. It's mostly built into the system. It helps that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, for example, in my private practice, I mean, I can just take calls too much, or, it's easy to get pulled into more when you even know that more isn't necessarily better. I think it depends on fragile. So I don't know if that's something I always have to monitor.
That's great. I would imagine a lot of clinicians feel that way.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? I mean, what's a way that you can, if you're feeling like you're over invested, how do you set that boundary or deal with that?
That's definitely ongoing.
For me too.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm actually getting free clinical advice right now.
I think it helps if I first of all think that this isn't necessarily which part of me feels I need to help and fix, or not fix, but just is there a little bit of my ego? Oh, my phone's ringing because someone needs me. Is there a need to be needed in there? Right? Just to be able to examine, is that part of it? We try to watch for that and feel like that's not it. I also have to watch for resentment. I don't want to feel resentful that this person's asking more of me than I'm being compensated for, or I have the appropriate time for. If I ever start to resent a client, then it's like, bing, something's not right here. I got to pay attention to that.
Wow. So that's really interesting. So you're talking about you could have a tendency, if it's unchecked, to overinvest yourself in your work and with specific clients. And if you're not careful or really leave it unchecked, then you could be investing so much of your time that you resent the fact that you're investing that time. Plus, you could feel resentful for the client for soaking up so much of your time.
Absolutely, and that's not helpful to them, and it's not helpful to me. So if I feel resentment, then that's usually a key. I want to feel that I'm doing this out of choice, because again, we don't want to feel compulsed about any. We're trying to watch our compulsiveness, or any kind of. Because I mean, if anyone said, okay, what's Anne been like since she was a kid? You know, I was probably someone who was going to kind of go a little bit farther, extra mile or whatever on something. Not that I'm not quite happy with, non-work time. I don't feel, but that's probably why some of us go into this field in the first place.
Yeah.
But it's not always from an altruistic kind of give back place. I think we always have to be self-examining. What am I getting out of this? Is there something that's not so right? And so that to me is sort of ongoing learning and maybe an area where I could make ongoing mistakes.
Excellent. What is a major success you've had since starting at LPP?
Well, I mean, I've just, successfully kind of terminated, or I hate that word, there should be a better one, but completed with a few folks. That's always really satisfying, and just see what they're up to and how much value they got from the program.
So that's for people listening, if you don't know, that's at least 4 months worth of them working, answering questions about themselves and or one-on-one counseling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and if they chose that.
Yeah.
That's really great and satisfying. And, I will sometimes hear from people quite, year or so later with a thank you or a happy Thanksgiving, or I'm grateful for this or that, or, and that's always satisfying too. I mean, on the flip side, I don't know if this came up before. I hate it when people just drop off and you don't know what happens, especially if you've been in touch or you've had a little, you do worry about that. I don't worry, but you just wonder where they go. People come back. People do all sorts of stuff. Sometimes they take a while. It's always nice to hear from someone if they were kind of MIA for a while, at least I find. And, with the pandemic, it was all over the map. I don't know if that's a good success besides just the completion.
That's a perfect success. Yeah. So you feel that sounds like that's a good balance of the investment of your time and energy into a person, but not too much. You've invested enough of your time that's just right for helping them complete the program and feel good about themselves, and you feel good about it, but not so much that this is a person that you're glad to see go because you've been so overwhelmed by helping them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, as I said, thankfully, the program structure helps with that. It's probably that shows up more in my private practice. Because I do take text messages and stuff like that. Mostly to make appointments, but but I think the overdoing thing, where were we on that? I think that it's more, back to the values. I think it's really wonderful when people really feel that they can, the value component has really helped them make a major shift. That feels really exciting. Yeah. And also when people sort of redo their life story, I mean, there are things that feel more kind of exciting or just inspiring. I don't know if that's what we're asking for. Just
we're good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. Is there the last one I have? Is there something that we talk about at LPP, either in our writings or in the module exercises, statements that we make, a sort of way of life that we suggest that you either disagree with or you find confusing or that you wonder about, like you're not sold 100%?
Well, were you asking me things I like and things I might not agree with completely, or
no? I'm really thinking of things that you just if you have disagreements, and I know that sometimes that's not all or nothing. So whether you have any disagreements with anything that we do or say at LPP, and if not disagreements, maybe just areas that you're not sure about.
Well, I mean, I think sometimes the exercises, the questions, I know one that gets to me sometimes. It's the maturity one. Never liked that word that much, I guess.
Does that sound condescending?
Maybe. But I'm always amazed that people don't balk at it as much as I think they would. It might just be my own issue with it. Sometimes they do. Again, if people are already hard on themselves, I would kind of hate to think that they're, now you would think by the time they're there, they're not. But again, it depends how engaged they were with the program,
Yeah.
how consistent they were. If people really work through the program, by the time they get to that one, they're kind of ready for that one. But if they haven't, and they're like barely scrambling around, and now they're at maturity, it's like, wait, you're not there yet. You're giving yourself too hard of a time. So sometimes it's the unfolding of that and the timing, and people aren't really at a place of looking at, they're still struggling around here, and it could just be because they were not as engaged.
That's an interesting one. The word maturity, in terms of if someone's talking to me about being more mature, if I'm not careful enough, if I haven't really read, or if I'm not thinking in a nuanced way, I could see where someone could come up to that section of our program that says part of living a non-addicted life is having a mature, being more mature. And that's sort of, it could sound like we're saying you need to grow up. And in a way, we're saying that about just all humans. So yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting
I'll
one.
tell you something. I think too that, again, bigger topic, but I'd say the majority of people I'm working with, majority, not completely, are, have a full career, have a family,
right.
Have a mature life. Like they're in adulting, they've done adulting.
Right.
They know how to pay their mortgage and their bills and be responsible and have, big responsibilities in their work and in their personal life. And that's not the reason that they're having a problem. They're drinking for other reasons. But at the same time, I mean, if it's a pretty big problem, you got to face, am I doing something that's harming someone else? Or,
yes,
they're going to cause some negatives for my family down the line. But yeah. So I think that's part of it. I think it depends. It's so rare that you come across someone who's got like some big, contrary to what everybody seems to, well, not everybody, thankfully, but people still think, that people with addictions are selfish and they're this and they're that. And it's never what you see. They mostly need a lot of support and boosting up. So I guess I kind of sometimes have when it comes to the maturity one.
well, this is good. Of course, if you're addicted, or if you have an addiction or experiencing addiction, then you have an over concentration on something that's, you're kind of tuned in with, even though it's destructive to you, and it's like kind of pulling on your ability to generate nice experiences for yourself or other people and other areas. So there's like, with respect to a specific addiction, then there is like, if you look at it and you come into the program, you can say, is this thing aligning with my values? Am I able to be my utmost mature self if I'm doing this thing? So in like a passing sense, like it makes sense and it's nice. It's how do you call it? It's a softer way of saying it, but there's this whole section with a heading maturity, or like it just kind of reads like be more mature. What would be a kind of softer language or a gentler word to use, do you think?
Well, I mean, I just want to say, I don't know if I even mind that heading as much as some of the questions in that one are a little oversimplified or but we don't want to get too fine-tuny on this. I mean, this could be like a staff meeting that we have at some point.
Yeah. Oh, this is good behind the scenes.
Updated the language, and I think sometimes we still need to do that. But as I said, it's, of course, if again, we have sort of mild, moderate, severe. So it depends on the level of, what's going on for the person. And I guess I also I don't like the idea that there's a stereotype that people who have any kind of problematic behavior are somehow necessarily being utterly irresponsible.
Right. Who are generally immature. Right.
Or, but I get it. I kind of get it. And as I said, sometimes people don't have as hard of a time of it as I do.
I wanted to do that because an interesting thing I think people could take away from this is that they could say, wow, that Anne is a really impressive person, really great. Or like, I would like it if she were my clinician. And then also you've kind of told on yourself a little bit about downfalls you've had, mistakes that you make, things you're still trying to work out. And I'm hoping the same thing about our program. I like, I've I've been tasked with sort of branding it and help market it on social media and things like that.
An amazing job on that, Zach.
Thank you. Well, one thing I want to do is, one way I want to handle it is be completely honest. And I think that part of the honesty is our program has to develop too. So we can't pitch this thing and say we have this perfect way, because it's just not our MO anyway. So it's a question that I really like to get out there more often, is being a little bit more, taking it to a meta level and talk about my program, like being willing to talk about LPP as an evolving thing and things that we, things that we can do better. Yeah.
Sorry,
I think people could still know that about our program and still want to take a part in it. Yeah.
Well, it's almost like an individual coach or clinician in any kind of growth mindset. We want to always be kind of growing and evolving and learning and being open. And I think that, it's not that you can kind of market this constant morphing thing, but that it's built in, that we do, and we have, and we continue to evaluate. I mean, we just added the MAT program, right? And we've shifted things. So I love that about it. I mean, I love that about the fact that there is an openness to changing, tweaking things. I think that's really awesome. I think that exists already, but I love that value, wanting to have it be that way.
Yeah. And what did I leave out that's important about you?
No, I know. No, I'm going to think of things later, but I doubt I'm thinking of anything now. I'm just, so that someone left out that they should know. No, I'm not a vegan anymore, by the way.
Well, I'm not a vegetarian anymore.
You're either. Not?
No. All right. So this will be the last thing we'll tell myself, and then no one will care about this, but still, so wow. People don't know, I was a vegetarian for years, and it was actually after talking to Peter Singer, who wrote a book, Animal Liberation in the 70s. And
we talked about this.
Yeah. And so that convinced me. I had always kind of been living with trying to reduce dissonance around it, but I was convinced then that I didn't see it ethically appropriate for me to be eating meat, because it was possible for me not to. And I didn't like the idea of it. I didn't think it was ethical. So I wasn't eating meat. My wife does all the cooking sort of by just the way that we structure our lives. She loves doing it too.
Awesome.
And when she was pregnant with Hadley, she already has an iron deficiency. And when she was pregnant with Hadley, she had been cooking vegetarian meals. She tried to have her own like source of protein, but the way she was doing it, she absorbed some of my vegetarian diet, and she wasn't feeling healthy. And so I decided that I would eat, I'm still thoughtful about it. I try to get it local and things like that. So I started eating meat so that there just wasn't that problem. We just both had meals that had plenty of sources of protein and things like that in it. And I haven't gone back to eating another way yet, because I feel it's pretty balanced right now. One of those things, like I didn't realize how I was doing vegetarianism wrong, probably. And I didn't even realize how
it's
wrong.
It's not always that easy to do it right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I intend to revisit it, but I haven't gone back. I'm right now living in constant dissonance because.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why I brought it up, because I still have dissonance around it. I do try and kind of drum it out, and it's not keeping me up at night, and I'm not giving myself a hard time about it, but it was a long process, and it still isn't quite right for me. I mean, I consider myself sort of reducitarian. I don't eat all day, but I'm a vegan all day, and then I kind of have what I want by night. But it's so many complex reasons why that's, but I told you I was in the animal rights movement and paid to be in it and worked as an activist for almost 10 years. So it's like a big part of my soul in my life. And I just like, I got to deal with this at some point, and I haven't figured out how. So when you figure it out, Zach, we can talk.
All right. Well, I hope this isn't the last time we talk on camera or on a podcast or something like that, because it was really, really great hearing from you. Yeah. And you're the missing link. We had all the other coaches on talking about their experiences and their thoughts about the program.
Which were really great. That's my train going by the way. It's really loud.
Great. It's the buzzer. But yeah, thank you so much for doing the podcast, and I hope that we'll be able to do it again soon. We're talking with Anne Earle,